Welcome to all the documents that you need before traveling in Korea, July 2022. As you know, COVID has made traveling a little bit more complicated, and you now need additional documents that you wouldn't have needed like 3 years ago. So, we've come up with this little guide for you to help you gather all the documents that you need before your trip. So, you need three main things before you travel to Korea. First is a KETA. Second is a negative COVID test, either a PCR or a RAT test. And third is a Q code. So the first thing that you need is a KETA. KETA is an electronic travel authorization that visa-free foreign visitors need to obtain before entering Korea. I recommend you go on Google and check if your country is a visa-free country that's able to enter Korea. If yes, then go ahead and apply for your KETA. I recommend you apply 1 week for your KETA before traveling, although the results come pretty fast, within 72 hours. You just want to make sure that you've secured it because you can't enter Korea without a KETA. Once your KETA has been approved, it is valid for 2 years. It costs about 10,000 Korean won, which is 12 New Zealand dollars to us. Also, keep in mind, KETA will ask you to put down a Korean address and a Korean mobile number, which is something that I didn't have when I applied for this initially because I'd never been to Korea. So what I did was just jotted down my hotel details. A KETA will also ask you to upload a low quality picture of yourself, 100 KB, very specific. So what I did was I asked someone to take a photo of me against a white wall and then using a phone, and then we looked for a website that will help lower the resolution of your picture to 100 KB, and then we finally uploaded the photo on the website. So this is what the KETA website looks like. You click the Apply for KETA button, and once you get your results, you'll also receive an email saying, hey, your KETA has been approved, and you can also click this button to see your application results. Also, don't worry too much if you've put down a hotel and you want to change your hotel details or accommodation details afterwards. Even after your KTA has been approved, you can go back and edit the Korean address and Korean mobile number as well, so don't worry too much. So this is what an approved KETA looks like. It will just have my information, my name, my date of birth. So we've blocked out all the details for confidentiality purposes, and it's got my approval details, when it was approved, expiration date, which is like 2 years from when I applied, and so yeah, go ahead and apply for yours. So the second thing you need is a negative COVID test. You can get either a PCR or a RAT test. So if you're getting a PCR, it must be issued within 48 hours or less before your departure date to an international country. And the results come out after a few hours. It's about 175 New Zealand dollars per person. And if you want a RAT test, it must be issued within 24 hours or less before your departure date to an international country. The results come out after a few minutes, and the cost is about 45 New Zealand dollars per person. Something that is quite confusing is the date and time of when we need to take the COVID test. So as said previously, and what you'll see in other website is that the PCR must be issued within 48 hours or less before your departure date to an international flight, and a RAT test must be issued within 24 hours or less before your departure date to an international flight. But actually, it matters the day of your flight, not the time of your flight. So actually, it's more accurate to say that the PCR must be issued within 2 days or less before your departure date to an international country, and a RAT test must be issued within 1 day or less before your departure date to an international country. It matters what day your flight is rather than the time of your flight. So I know it's still a little bit confusing, so we've put in some example scenarios here. So, for example, my flight from New Zealand Wellington to Hong Kong is on the 7th of July 2022. So that means if I'm gonna get a rat test, then the rat test must either be on the 6th of July or 7th of July. That's because rat tests must be issued within 1 day or less before the international flight. If I'm getting a PCR test, I must get it either on the 5th of July, the 6th of July, or 7th of July because my flight is going to be on the 7th of July, and a PCR test must be issued within 2 days or less before my departure date to an international country. Another example is my flight from New Zealand Wellington to New Zealand Auckland is on the 7th of July 2022. My flight from New Zealand Auckland to Hong Kong is on the 8th of July 2022. So this means I must get a rat test either on the 7th of July or 8th of July. Again, a rat test must be 1 day before my international flight to go to an international country. And if I'm getting a PCR test, I must get it on the 6th of July, 7th of July, or 8th of July because PCR tests must be issued 2 days before my departure date to an international country. So again, the specific time for test or flight doesn't matter, but the departure date they're talking about is about the international flight, not domestic flight. So you see, I based when I'm gonna do my COVID test on my flight New Zealand to Hong Kong rather than New Zealand Wellington to New Zealand Auckland, even though this is really the first leg of my flight. But what they're considering here is the first international flight, which is New Zealand Auckland to New Zealand Hong Kong, 8th of July.
So another country you might have is that what about if you're transiting into another country before arrive in Korea? So here's an example. When you depart from country A and arrive in country B on 23rd of May and leave the country to Korea on 24th of May, it all depends if you whether stay in the country B or do not stay in country B. What does it mean is that if whether you leave the airport in the country B. So let's say you decide to leave the country B and explore the country before you arrive in Korea, then your departure date is based on the day when you arrive in country B, which is 24th of May. And so your rat test have to be done within 24 hours. That means you have to be done 23rd of May or after. And for the PCR, which is 48 hours, which is 22nd and 23rd and after. Well, if you decide not to leave the airport and stay in the airport, then your departure date is based on when you first depart from the country A. So you're 24 hours before the rat test, which is 22nd, or the PCR 21st and 22nd, or after you're allowed to do the PCR test.
And the third thing that you need is a Q code. A Q code is a South Korean QR code which holds all your vaccination information. This travel requirement was created to help shorten the time for quarantine inspection for foreign travelers entering the country. So basically, when you arrive Korea, this is the Q code that they scan, and basically once they scan it, they know if you've been vaccinated, they know if you've gotten a negative PCR or rat test result, and you're just able to pass by the Korean border much quicker. So in order to be issued a Q code, South Korean QR code, you have to visit the website and upload all the information like the ones below. Something that you'll need is vaccination certificates. You need to be fully vaccinated to enter Korea without quarantine. Being fully vaccinated means having your first and your second shot. You also need a third shot, a booster, if it's been over 180 days since your second shot. Note, you don't need a third shot, a booster, if you have had COVID in the past and if it was a confirmed infection, even if it's been over 180 days since your second shot. Another thing that you'll need to upload in your Q code application is a negative COVID test, a PCR or RET test. As said previously, the PCR test negative needs to be uploaded 48 hours or less before your departure date to an international country, and a RET test negative needs to be issued 24 hours or less before your departure date to an international country. Here's the tip. You should start your QR code application a few days before you depart for Korea, and usually you can save your application. And the last piece of the puzzle that you'll probably need to upload is your negative test result, the PCR or RET. And once you finally upload your negative COVID result, you'll get issued the Q code straight away after you submit it, so you don't need to worry too much. So this is what a completed Q code looks like. This is what you'll be issued after you submitted all the necessary information. We've blocked our Q code for confidentiality purposes, and it's just got your passport number, input number, and yeah, easy. Okay, so now we're almost in Korea. We're on the plane to Korea, and while you're on board on the plane, you'll need to fill out a health questionnaire and a travel record declaration. This will be given to you by the flight attendants. And once you arrive in the Korean airport, your temperature will be checked, your QR code will be scanned. This is quite quick. And you are also required to take a PCR test within 3 days of arriving in Korea. So we traveled in Korea around July 7. However, in July 25, you will need to take a PCR test 1 day after arriving in Korea. Earlier, around July 7, when we traveled, we had about 3 days to take the PCR test, and we could wait in a hotel for our negative result. But once July 25 hits, you'll need to take the PCR test within 1 day after arriving in Korea.
And the results come out at midnight. And we took the test around 8 p.m. And the PCR testing is located outside of Terminal 10. We just crossed the road, literally like a 2-minute walk.
So this says the same thing. Starting July 25, all international travelers must receive a PCR test within 1 day after arrival, and the previous 3 day leeway has been shortened to 1 day. There's 3 test centers in Incheon International Airport, which is the airport which we arrived in from New Zealand, and 1 test center in Gimhae International Airport. It costs 80,000 Korean won and 100 New Zealand dollars. So that's it from us. That's all the documents you need and all the COVID documents that you'll end up having to gather. And all the best for your trip. Enjoy!